So my name is Justin Brannan. I'm a I've been a politician for about 8 months. Um, I'm a newly elected city councilman for the neighborhoods where I grew up, which is Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Bath Beach, Bensonhurst. It's all these little neighborhoods in southwest Brooklyn that are underneath the Verrazano Bridge, for those of you that might know it, on the Brooklyn side. And I never in a million years thought that I would become an elected official. Frankly, growing up, I thought politics was a bunch of bullshit. Never followed it, never cared about it. Rent was due on the 1st, had to buy groceries. That was way more important than who the president was. But I got my start really as an animal rights activist as a teenager, sort of the tail end of the first wave of AIDS activism, and that rolled into animal rights activism. But I never saw the ligaments between activism and electoral politics until much later. Growing up, I wanted to be a member of the Ramones, not a member of Congress. But the journey that I ended up taking makes a lot of sense to me. And I found a lot of folks who are also working in this space, serving in public service, who started out similarly. So I started a band in high school. Whatever, it was nothing special. We kept playing, we kept putting out records, putting out 7-inches, sort of doing our own thing. DIY, right? So now DIY, people think HGTV and Home Depot and stuff like that. DIY, do it yourself, I mean, it was an ethos, I think about this a lot, not because we wanted to do it DIY. We did it DIY because there was just no other way to do it. I think if someone else would have offered to do it for us, we might have accepted the offer. However, we didn't have any money for them to do it for us. Therefore, we had to do it ourselves, whether it was printing shirts, whether it was booking tours, that kind of thing. So, and then eventually I think we sort of took the DIY thing and sort of embraced it, and we're proud of it that we did things ourselves. But that's not really how it started. It started because the stuff that we were doing, no one had done before. So there was no paved road for us to follow. You know, we sort of had to make it up as we went along. Even as when we started, so back up. I'm in Fordham University. I get a call on a I think I must have got something on my beeper. And then I go to a payphone, I call back, and it was someone from the record label saying, you know, we're putting out your record. We're gonna make you a star. You know, you got to go on tour for 3 months. Like, oh fuck, okay. So, but that 3 months turned into about 10 years of touring the world. We went to about 50 countries, 5 continents, basically you name it. If they sent us 5 plane tickets, we would go and play there. The countries that the promoters would often tell us no one went to, those are the countries we said, no, that's where we want to go. No one goes to south of France anymore. No one goes to Portugal or Spain. We're just going to book you 3 months in Germany. We were like, no, send us to the south of France, send us to Portugal. So we did that ended up about 10 years. And I learned so much that at the time I didn't realize I was absorbing. From talking to kids from every single walk of life, who were all united through this love of this particular style of music, which was hardcore punk. It's like I'm sure a lot of you guys know it, but if you're telling your dentist, it's like a cross between the Ramones and like Metallica, I guess. And we would play towns in the middle of nowhere where we had to park our van and then walk the rest of the way because the streets weren't big enough to get to the club. And there would be 300, 500, 1,000 kids in all these little cities who knew who we were, knew our lyrics, had our lyrics tattooed on them. It was totally insane. And there's no other style of music where you had such a strong subculture wherever you went, where there were kids who were so passionate, kids who barely spoke English, but they could sing your lyrics right back at you, and they could sing along to your songs. And after the show, we were also straight edge, right? Straight edge was, you don't drink, you don't do drugs. So after the show, we weren't going to like the strip club or the bar. We were like staying behind at the club, talking to all the kids from this town, for whatever town we were in. And you realize how much we all really had in common, which was insane. I mean, whether we were in Cape Town, South Africa, or Perth, Australia, or New Zealand, or wherever the hell we were, there was this common thread, this commonality between all these kids who wanted to change the world and frankly thought that they could. And we're all there sort of united in this love for this particular kind of music. But I don't think at the time it really felt special. It was just like, well, this is cool, and then the next day we went on and played the next club, next town. But the stuff that you learn, the stuff that once all that stuff is in your rearview mirror and you realize the lessons you learned, it definitely gives you a sense of fearlessness that you can then take with you in whatever you're doing in life. I mean, I can draw a pretty straight line between sleeping on a floor in Basque Country and having to steal avocados from the grocery store to eat that day, and years later working for a humanitarian nonprofit and sitting down at the Four Seasons and looking in this guy's eye and asking him for $1 million like it was nothing, So I think not coming through the channels in the conventional ways sort of prepared me for that kind of stuff, where you learn very early on that the billionaire and the homeless guy both put their pants on the same way. And it gives you a very special outlook on life and just a different way of going about things. And it also teaches you troubleshooting, right? So we were in France and our bus broke down, and we had to play a show that night in Holland with Run DMC. And Run DMC is from Queens. We were from Brooklyn, but we had to go to Holland to hook up with these guys. That's how European tours work. So our bus breaks down in France. We have to rent 2 vans because there's too many people to put in one van. No one knows how to drive stick. We go to the whatever the rent-a-car place was in France. They said, okay, we'll rent you the two vans, but you can't leave the country. Not a problem. We immediately take the 2 vans to Holland, and we go to the show. We get to the show. And they're sort of, showing us where to go, I guess, to unload our stuff. And out of nowhere, this giant, crane, sort of like a cherry picker crane, backs up into our van, totals the van, one of them. So now here we are in a different country with 2 vans that we weren't allowed to leave the first country from, and one of them has just been totaled by a tractor, by a cherry picker. So dealing with situations like that just about every single day when you're 7,000 miles from home really prepares you for just about anything that you can face once you grow up and put on a suit. And I think along the way, it's still at that time, never in a million years that I think I would have gotten into public service, but slowly but surely, I think I was finding that I always wanted to do something a little bit more rewarding. So once the band was done, 2006 or so, I think when I knew I was done touring was we were about to embark on our 3rd tour of New Zealand, and I was complaining about how long the flight was going to be. That's how I knew I was done. I was about to go on an all-expense paid trip for the 3rd time to New Zealand, and I'm like Frank Sinatra complaining about the accommodations. That's when I knew I was finished. I remember running into a friend of mine from high school in the supermarket before I left for tour, and I was buying dog food for my poor dog that I never saw, and he was, shopping for dinner or whatever, and we had this weird sort of sliding doors moment where, I don't know what the hell the term is, but he said, I was like, yeah, I'm about to go on tour again to New Zealand, and he was like, wow, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, what are you up to? He's like, oh, I just bought a new BMW. I got 2 kids, just bought a new house. And I'm like, wow, that sounds fucking awesome. Because, so you had this moment where I just wanted that sort of normal life, and he was so enamored with me, about to go embark on this tour. It was very, very interesting. But so it was preparing me for things I didn't even realize. I think years later, The band stops touring. In between the tours, before the bands were making enough money, we would do temp jobs, and we had friends who would get us temp jobs on Wall Street, just clerical sort of jobs. I had one job where we had a big box of class action lawsuits. Our job was to sit there all day, take the paper out, highlight 3 lines of the class action lawsuit, put it into another box. That was our job. So these are the types of jobs that I was prepared for as a punk rock musician in between tours. So once I was done with, once I had decided to leave the life of, sleeping in the back of a van, I was like, well, I guess I'll have to go get a job and work on Wall Street because I know I can get that temp job. So I went back working on Wall Street. I ended up working at a firm called Bear Stearns. So I left what I realized was a more stable life as a punk rock musician to a firm that was about to, bring the entire world economy down with it. But even working at Bear Stearns, it was the same kind of thing. I had no business working at Bear Stearns. I should not have been working there. I remember going on my job interview. I had a handlebar mustache, and as like a goof, and I so didn't care about getting the job that I didn't shave the mustache when I went to the job interview, and I still got the job. So I've always sort of had, and I think people, who come from a similar sort of DIY space or an unconventional space, you sort of have this attitude where it's like, just lock me in the room, give me an hour, and I'll figure it out, And that's always how I've been. Like, I worked in radio for a while. I worked for Howard Stern. I had no business working for Howard Stern, right? I had no idea about radio. I didn't know anything about anything. I had one of the interns showing me how to use the program that I was getting paid to use. But it was just like, just lock me in the room, give me an hour, I'll figure it out. And then you just do, because you have that sort of fearlessness that you'll figure it out, and it's this sort of autodidactic kind of thing where you're just like, give me a minute to take a look at this thing and take it apart, and I'm sure I could figure it out. So working in radio, then I started getting involved in union organizing. I realized that I was hired to work 5 days a week, but they kept asking us to work 7 days a week. I said, this is interesting. So I went to my union and I said, they're asking us to work on weekends, but they're not paying us any extra money. I said, well, that's a problem. I said, well, I know. So I went and I spoke to my boss, and I ended up becoming like a shop steward for my union. So slowly but surely, I was like, all right, I'm starting to get towards service and helping other people and something bigger than me and that kind of stuff. And I'm a vegetarian and working on Wall Street. Like, there's only so many iceberg wedge salads you can eat at these steakhouse meetings and stuff. So I knew I was heading towards something that was more than just zeros in my checking account. So I ended up walking, I don't know why I did this, but I ended up walking into the office of my local city council person, who I years later would end up replacing. And I said, I want a job. I want to learn politics. I want to learn public service. He had no idea why I would want to do this. I asked him how he got into politics, and he said he thought he was dropped on his head as a kid. But I fell in love with it. I fell in love with helping people, and I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I've been sort of getting at all these years that I didn't realize, that I could sit at a desk, people could come in with their problems, they come in with their knot, and you try to undo that knot and send them on their way. And I was like, this is where I need to be. But being a DIY guy, that wasn't enough, So I started thinking more about public service and how you connect with the people that you're privileged and you're to serve. And I realized that the days of people walking into their local council person's office with a problem are over. Aside from some senior citizens that know that you're there, they need help with their rent or with making sure they don't get evicted, stuff like that, sort of, they know. But the average person does not walk into the government office, your local storefront government office, and say, hey, I got a problem. And I think it hit me when I was working for my predecessor, and there was something happened over the weekend in the neighborhood. There was a big car accident or something, and it was all over the internet, all over these local sort of, message boards or whatever it was at the time. It wasn't Facebook yet. But no one was coming into the office or calling the office to talk about it. And I thought that was interesting because there was this whole other layer of people who were clearly concerned about something that had happened, but there was an obvious disconnect because they weren't coming into their local representative's office to ask them about what had happened or was anyone hurt or that kind of stuff. So I took note of this, and I realized that I had to start interjecting myself into these situations to help people. Instead of sitting there and waiting for people to come in and ask for help, I had to go to where the help was needed and say, hi, I can help you with that. And I started doing that. I would see people who were on Facebook or whatever it was who were saying, hey, there's a broken, my curb outside my house is broken. It's been like this for 6 months. And I would say, hi, I work for the local councilman. I can help you with that. And I kept doing that over and over and over. And eventually other people started to take notice. And now, to this day, they tag me now on Facebook if there's a cat stuck in a tree or whatever it is. They expect me to put on my cape and hop over there. I usually do. But it showed me that there's a real disconnect there between local government where I started by saying how I never cared about politics, right? It was the national politics just always seemed so ephemeral to me, ethereal. It didn't affect my day-to-day life, right? I think now it's a little bit different, but at the time, it didn't matter who the president was to me because I was living my life. I was working. I had to buy groceries. I had to decide between paying my cell phone bill or paying the rent, that kind of stuff. But local government was where the rubber really met the road. Local government is where someone could come into your office with a problem and you can send them on their way with their problem fixed. But at some point, I saw that system had failed because people were not coming in anymore. And I know that they had problems, but they didn't know who to go to or whatever it may be. So they were sort of crying out into the unknown. And I think now, as an elected official, it's still something that keeps me up at night, is people who are suffering in silence. People who don't know that there are people that can help them. People that don't know that whatever problem they have, that there's someone that can undo that knot for them. And I represent now a district where, there are people who have Maseratis in their driveway, and there are people who don't know where the next meal is coming from. So the dynamic there is, the spectrum is wild, but the people who suffer in silence and are one paycheck away from being homeless or one paycheck away from, or they don't know where the next meal is coming from, these are the people that keep me up at night because I don't know that I'm reaching them. So having to meet people where they're at becomes so important because my job as a public servant is to be serving these people. So, there's a saying, there go the people, let me follow them, for I am their leader. So that's really what it's about. It's about meeting people where they're at and finding problems that they're having to try to find innovative ways to fix these problems. But there's a blessing and a curse there because just the other day I met with a bunch of business owners who, we hooked them up with folks from the mayor's administration to talk about different regulations and fines and sort of this onerous stuff that is still left over from the Bloomberg administration, who was the former mayor here, where people felt that there were real arbitrary enforcement going on with businesses and from the Department of Health, and your ice cubes aren't cold enough and that kind of stuff. So I had a bunch of business owners around a table, and I realized there's a disconnect on the level of perception and reality when it comes to data and when it comes to what people are actually feeling. So you had a bunch of business owners who were talking about, I just got fined for this, I just got fined for that, whatever it is, and you have a guy from the administration saying, well, actually, our numbers are way down. The fines that we've given to businesses are down 40, 50%, and the data says this and the data says that. But you have folks who are just not feeling that because the data might be correct, but if they're not personally feeling that in their own lives and their own experience, then there's a real disconnect there. I mean, you have now in New York City, crime now is the lowest it's ever been. It's at historic lows. Like it hasn't been this safe since 1950, they say. But if your car was broken into last night, you don't believe that. And it's impossible for me to make you believe that if you have a personal story. And I think now that social media and the sort of instantaneousness of the internet has shrunk our world in myriad ways and in amazing ways, but it's also made, for people like me, our jobs more difficult, more of a challenge because of this perception and reality problem where people's personal experience is always going to trump whatever the data says. It's always going to eclipse whatever the numbers say, and it's hard to really make that point to people. So, I represent a relatively safe district, but if a car is blocking someone's driveway, people expect the SWAT team to show up. Little do they know that the cops in the neighborhood are actually out fighting real crime. They're not back at the precinct or the station house playing pinochle. They're out there responding to crime. But because the neighborhood is relatively safe, it becomes this interesting dynamic where when you have a really safe neighborhood, you don't really understand what's actually going on behind the scenes. And I think now, with apps like Citizen or Twitter or whatever it may be, where you have this instant TikTok of the neighborhoods, if you had these apps back in the 70s when the city was actually on fire, I think then people would really see what was going on. Whereas back then, you had to wait until the 8 o'clock news to find out what the hell happened that day, or tomorrow's newspaper. Whereas now, if someone's car gets broken into, back in the day, there were the 3 nosy people on the block that knew about it. But now the entire world knows that your car was broken into, right? Ostensibly, the entire world could exponentially know by your post on Facebook that your car is broken into, and it creates this perception of disorder or lawlessness or whatever it is. And meanwhile, you have the politicians on television saying crime is down. It's down lower than it's ever been, and data says this and data says that, but it doesn't connect with people. So that's something that I've really struggled with to find a way to bridge that gap. The digital divide is still very real. Not only in demographics or with age, but in people who are looking for real help. People who probably could use help more desperately than the folks who know how to get it. So I think that's something that we all struggle with. I don't know the answer. I don't know how we get to where we need to be there. I try to do, my personal thing, I try to do as much outreach as I can. I have staffers that speak the languages of my district and look like the people of my district to provide some safety and comfort. So people come into the office, they can feel that there's someone there that speaks their language and looks like them, which is, goes a very long way. But there's still those people who are out there suffering and don't know how to get help. And I think that for those of us who walk around with a fistful of solutions, it's sometimes incumbent upon us to try to find these people, to try to meet them where they're at, to let them know that we have solutions to their problems, or maybe come up with ways to connect folks to this kind of help. In my district, there's a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations that do a lot of great local humanitarian work, whether it's delivering meals on holidays or, providing funding for a family that just had a really bad fire, this kind of stuff. And I one of the groups that I co-founded, we used to go out on Thanksgiving and we'd give out meals to people that requested meals. And even if we gave out 100 meals, I knew that there were 10,000 more that we probably should have been giving out, but there was no way for these people to let us know that they needed a meal. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, thinking about how do I let folks know that the resources are there and that the system can work if they reach out and find someone who can sort of, be their scythe on this bureaucratic safari, and sort of help them, navigate the system. So like when we had that business roundtable, one of the guys had just gotten some fine for keeping his door open when he had the air conditioner on or something. So we had the guy from the Consumer Affairs Department go over there and take a look. Sure enough, the guy shouldn't have got the fine for whatever reason. So something like that, where there's a $4,000 fine for this business, that if he didn't know or he didn't come into the right room and speak to the right people, he would have just had to pay this fine and maybe close his business. But because serendipitously he was at this meeting, we were able to undo that knot. So that's the kind of stuff that's really tough. I think it's easy for elected officials to surround themselves with yes men, yes women who tell them, whatever you say, boss, you got the right idea. And I think that's really dangerous because you're not hearing from the people. You're not hearing what the real needs are. So that's why I still try to do as much hand-to-hand combat as I can with whether I'm arguing with people on Twitter or whatever it may be, because I'm still the same guy that I was before I was elected. I'm still the same guy that slept on those floors in Basque Country and stole those avocados. And so I think it's important for us sort of unconventional thinkers to try to find better solutions for some of these problems that are just not going away. And I think that, in a society where there's so many resources to help people who are vulnerable, help people who are feeling real, true anxiety, especially now with what's going on in our country, it's not easy, But I think if we head towards that direction, then we're gonna be heading on the right path, and that's my spiel.
Thank you very much.
So, Justin, if you had access to an army or at least a room full of legal hackers to do your bidding, to help your constituency, to help your communities, what would be the sort of top things in which you might want to harness them to do? So this is a crew. This is a pretty unique crew. They don't, for the most part, they don't really give a damn about the status quo of the law. They understand the value of technology, and they want to use it to promote social justice. That's probably if not everyone in this room, almost everyone.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I think it's really about finding ways to engage historically underrepresented communities, vulnerable communities that either are reluctant to reach out, afraid of authority, but who have real issues that, if put before the right person, can be easily solved. It's not easy, If I stand at a train in the morning, back in the day, I would stand outside a club and hand out my flyers. Right now, I stand at a Subway and I hand out flyers saying how fantastic I am, why they should vote for me, right? So I'll stand there with a flyer that says all the stuff that my office does, all the languages we speak, hoping that someone will take this flyer and say, oh, wow, this guy, this guy Justin in my neighborhood sounds like he can solve my problem. But even on that level, I know I'm not reaching the masses. I think the city has this great municipal app now for 311, which I think is helpful. But even that there's a digital divide there. I think we have to find a way to connect. It's so broad, but to find a way to connect people who truly, truly need the help with the help the cursor is blinking. It's just waiting there for them. So instead of me only helping the guy with the Maserati in the driveway, I'm helping the people who are about to be kicked onto the street, I don't know how we do that. But if I could figure out a way to reach those people who never vote, who are like me, who don't think it matters, like those sorts of people, to make them see that the system can work, it would be a revolution. I mean, to have... I would love for my office to be packed every day with people streaming in with problems that we can just bang out these problems. They come in with problems. We have solutions. That's our job. But I think there's got to be a place where we're being proactive, because Those folks are not going to come to us for myriad reasons. So we have to find a way to go to them and meet them where they're at, however we can.
Time for one more question.
Come on.
Oh yeah, James, you got a question?
I was just thinking, the idea is trying to analyze resources and dashboard them is a really difficult problem. It works out, and even in like large-scale IT infrastructures, there's this role called DevOps that's sort of evolved, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, where a lot of it's like trying to identify where there are congestion issues or like
Right.
underutilized resources. And what we're really talking about is for like dashboarding tools for public services and things like that. I wonder if there's like anyone's done a sort of a dashboard tool of here's what our capacity is for serving DMB licensing requests. We're down, we're under capacity. That kind of stuff actually you'll see on like the Virginia DMB.
Right.
I don't know at a state or a city level whether or not you can get that kind of data egressed easily would be one sort of like technical concern.
Right.
And then trying to identify all the services and stuff, that's a cataloging problem. And then also is like even for IT people, that's a difficult sort of endeavor. But that might be something that's a practical project. Identify 15 or 50 public services in your district that you provide.
Right.
Identify a way of dashboarding in effect whether or not there's the blinking light or not.
Right.
That would be a practical IT operation and would connect. I don't know if you want to chime in on DevOps side.
I think that's a great idea, actually. Yeah. The other question I had that kind of related to that is how do you intake problems? Do you use a ticketing system, or what do you do to feed them in?
It's still pretty old school. I mean, we have like a Google Doc where we enter people's information. The city has an infrastructure there. It's called Council Stat or something. I've never used it. Where you can, but it's basically just, it's basically, it's so great I've never used it. It's basically just a note-taking where you can say, I spoke to Mrs. Jones, she needed X, I did this on this date, that kind of stuff. But I could write that on a pad. I mean, so there is no real. It's sort of incumbent upon us. Like old lady Crabtree comes in, we write down her name and her problem, and then it's up to us then to maintain that relationship until that problem is fixed. There's no way to, say there should be a thing that says it's been 6 days since old lady Crabtree came in with this problem. What are you doing about it? I have my staff follow up with people just so because they'll just think if they didn't call me back in 3 days, they don't care. It's like, so we call them to say, we're still working on it. We'll get there. Just so they feel we didn't just lose, they're not just lost into the void. But it's very labor intensive to do that, Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, this is a general question, but under Olber, how often do proposals that involve computers feel like distractions in dealing with these problems?
You mean like legislatively?
And in terms of reaching the people or bringing them in or dealing with intake.
Right.
You mentioned I could write that out.
Oh, right. That's just, I still have an AOL address, so I keep it real. I did. It's called loyalty. No, but I'm not. That's an interesting question. I think if the app or the program, whatever the hell it is making my life easier, then I'm going to use it, right? But this program that I just mentioned, then I have to log into another thing to look at it. I may as well just pull it up on my Outlook and say, here's my list. Here's my conversation with this person. I can just do it that way, sort of the old school way. But that's a good question. I think people would use it much more if it were. Even on Twitter, right? Like someone will take a photo of some sort of problem, a garbage or something, right? The 311 bot will say, thank you so much for that thing. Please, now do this. It's like, no, I already showed you the problem. Now go fix it. Don't now tell me now I have to enter in the problem. That's how you lose a citizen, right? Like a citizen should be able to say, I just took a photo of an issue that needs attention, something nothing urgent, right? Like garbage problem, a broken sidewalk or whatever. And if they tag 311 or they tag whatever the municipal government is, that should suffice. Telling someone then, thank you so much for this photo. Now please go to this website and upload the photo. It's like, get the fuck out of here. I'm not going to do that. Right? I mean, so it should just, and I see people saying that. Like I'll see people say, I just sent you the photo. What do you want me to do now? Like I don't work for the city, right? Like so there should be a component that can then take that and go, all right, we got it. Like it's on 99th Street and whatever avenue. It's an old refrigerator that shouldn't be there. Send sanitation out to get it. It's not brain surgery, But when you ask people then to take that extra step, you lose them,
Yeah, it speaks to good design and making sure that you understand empathetically citizens and their problems. And
I mean, you could create an app that would make me obsolete, right? I mean, that would be sad, but like when they really created 311, it's close to having a local, official, but there's like my job as a city council person, first and foremost, is to oversee all these city agencies. So my job is to light a fire under their ass to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But if you had an app where you can just complain about stuff and it answered you in real time and actually got stuff done, you wouldn't need people like me, An app can't fire up a crowd, but I mean, it could get your garbage picked up, and give me more time to do other stuff, But we spend a lot of time as a local elected. You spend a lot of time on that hand-to-hand combat of quality of life issues, which are important to everybody, And these aren't issues that really should be taking up the manpower of an entire staff of human beings. A lot of it is very easily visually fixed. If you just say, here's the problem, go fix it. I'm sure we'll get there eventually, but we're not there yet.
Well, that's what the people in this room are here to
Get
do.
on it, guys.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much,
Oh,
Councilman.
thank you. Right on.